In this video, we're going to take a look at how a workplace that recently reopened during Phase 3 can greatly reduce the risk of an internal COVID-19 outbreak as employees return back to work. In this example, we're going to look at how Tableau, R, machine learning, and simulation models can be integrated to detect early signs of a spread through real-time contact tracing. So this contact tracing tool is built using Tableau and Tableau's external client integration with R and R server. So it's running a real-time R server and it's passing through values that the user enters into various parameters and recalculating the models in real time. So in this example, we're going to review the dashboard from the perspective of Derek, an employee expected to return back to the office 9 days after its reopening. So the morning that Derek is expected to return back to the office, he logs into the office contact tracing tool just to see if any of the employees that he's expected to come in contact with are showing symptoms. And he knows that he's going to be in contact with James that morning for several meetings, so he logs in and he searches for James. Now we can see here James has been in contact with 4 employees over the past 9 days, and if we hover over each of the employees, we can see exactly when they were in contact as well as what was the risk classification. And we can see that the risk classification for these contacts was low. Now we also have the option to see any indirect contacts of James. So these are essentially second degree contacts. And in this case, Tess was in contact with Juan as well as Mandy. And both of those individuals were in contact with James. And we can see here again, low risk factors. And we're interested to look back at the last 4 weeks. In this case, we have roughly 2 weeks worth of data. So 4 weeks will encompass that. And we'll go ahead and look to see if there are any risk regions associated with these contacts. And the risk region is an area of users that are showing symptoms, potentially spreading to others at a rapid rate. And we can see here that there is no risk region. Derek is curious to know which employees he should avoid when returning back to the office. So we're going to go ahead and clear the employee search and see all employees that have been in the office for the past 9 days. And we're going to look to see what other insight the dashboard may have to offer. And we can see on the bottom left that we have the employee risk factor, and this is based on how each employee enters information into their symptoms and their contacts. We can essentially determine through various models what the risk factor is of each employee and the risk of maintaining that relationship. And so we can see here that there are 4 very high risk, 1 high, 1 moderate, and everyone else is fairly low risk. And this is indicated by the color of the employee, as well as the lines. So the lines themselves, the color indicates the risk factor associated with maintaining that relationship and that contact. By toggling on risk regions, we can see where the model is predicting and detecting high risk spread areas. And we can see here that Jordan seems to be the epicenter of one of the risk regions, as shown in red. And by hovering over Jordan, we can see all of the contacts that he's had within the past 9 days. And we can type in Jordan into the employee search to see all of the indirect contacts as well. And we can see here that it seems that most folks are stemming back to Jordan. And when typing in Danny, we can see that Danny, who's now showing as a low-risk employee, is in a medium-risk area based on his contact with Vanessa, and Vanessa, who was in contact with Jordan. At the end of the workday, all employees are asked to update their contacts within the Office contact tracing tool. And on the upper right, there is a menu button to make an entry, and the user can select either to make an update to their contacts or to their symptoms. So we're going to go ahead and first make an update to contacts. From the contact screen, the user is asked to select the date that the interaction took place, to confirm their name, as well as the name of the employee that they were in contact with or their employee ID number. And the user can make multiple updates by clicking back and re-entering the contact screen. So in this example, Derek is going to update the tool to show that he was in contact with James on July 2nd. Now, since this model is running in real time using Tableau and Tableau's integration with R, the user simply has to press F5 to refresh the model and to view the most recent output. And we can see on the top right that there now is a relationship between Derek and James. And when hovering over, we can see that the model has classified the risk factor as very low. Now, later on that evening, Derek begins to run a temperature, and he's worried that he may have a fever, and he wants to notify others. So he logs back into the contact tracing tool, and he navigates to symptoms. And here he's expected to answer 3 questions. The first being, have you or anyone in your household tested positive for COVID-19? have you been in contact with anyone who has tested positive for COVID-19? And do you have a fever, loss of taste or smell, or are you nauseous and vomiting? So here, Derek is going to update that he believes he's running a fever. So he navigates down to fever and selects yes. And he enters the date up on top of when he's noticing these symptoms. And now he clicks back to the dashboard. Now by pressing F5, we can see what classification of risk the model has assigned Derek. And we can see here that the model has assigned Derek a moderate risk. So we're going to go ahead and search for Derek within the employee search. And we can see all of the indirect relationships that have branched off of James, and James has been in contact with Derek. So again, we have the direct relationships and the indirect relationships, and we can see that any relationship to Derek is a moderate risk relationship right now based on his symptoms. Now, as other users begin to hear of Derek's symptoms, they're curious to know how this affects them. In particular, anyone that was in contact with Derek or in direct contact with Derek during his time in the office. So we're going to go ahead and toggle on the risk regions, and we're going to take a look at Derek to see how the risk region was affected. So we can see here that as a result of Derek's symptoms, 3 other employees are now falling into the moderate risk region. And these are employees who were either in direct contact or indirect contact with Derek. And we can see here that the model has flagged Julia and Juan as being low-risk employees since they're currently not showing any symptoms, but falling into a moderate risk area as a result of their contact with James after James was in contact with Derek. So as Derek is doing his due diligence to update the tool as accurately as possible, he remembers that on his way out of the office, he was in the elevator with Jose, and he wants to make sure that Jose, if he accesses the tool, is aware of his symptoms. So he navigates back to contact, and he makes an update to reflect that he was in contact that day with Jose. That evening, Derek learns that his neighbor that he was in contact with yesterday has now tested positive for COVID-19. Derek logs back into the contact tracing tool and navigates the symptoms and makes an update to his symptoms. And he answers yes for have you been in contact with anyone who's tested positive for COVID-19. After making his update, Derek navigates back to the contact tracing dashboard and presses F5 to refresh the model output. And we can see based on the top right that the region that Derek is in is now being considered a high-risk region, and Derek is a very high-risk employee, and any relationships to Derek are very high-risk as well. So we can see here that Anna, James, as well as Julia, in addition to Jose, are now being flagged as low-risk employees because they're not showing any symptoms, but are falling into a high-risk area based on their contact with Derek. Now, it's important to remember that this example only follows Derek as he begins to return back to the office during Phase 3, and it's likely that there are tens, if not hundreds, of other employees at this company that are also returning back that are entering their information simultaneously. And for that reason, when looking at the network diagram, it can become very congested if our intent is to minimize the number of intersections. So the user also has the ability to select a network diagram that plots each user on the circumference of a circle. Plotting the users on the circumference of the circle can be a great way of showing a network diagram when the employee counts is relatively high and when minimizing intersections will create more congestion than necessary. Additionally, it acts fairly well when running the simulation model and trying to determine root cause analysis, so we can trace this all the way back to the original patient 0, so to speak, within the office. So lastly, we're going to run the simulation from the beginning of the video in which a company saw an escalating outbreak, but this time we're going to run it from the perspective of a company that all employees are opting into contact tracing. They're willingly updating their information in terms of contacts and symptoms, and a company that's quick to intervene at first signs of a potential outbreak. And we can see here that once the model has identified a moderate to high risk region, employees can use their own discretion to distance themselves from certain contacts, and the company can intervene much more quickly, preventing the spread internally of a COVID-19 outbreak. And what we learned is that employees are generally willing to disclose of this information in terms of who they were in contact with and their symptoms, if it prevents the spread or someone else from getting sick within the office, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together.